How to find local podcasters. Welcome to the Audacity to Podcast, episode 284. Thank you for joining me for the Audacity to Podcast. I'm Daniel J. Lewis, and this is the award-winning, in-depth podcast about podcasting. It's where I give you the guts and teach you the tools to launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions and finding success. Hanging out with other podcasters can be inspiring and even profitable. Remember, profit does not mean it has to be money. Profit could mean opportunities, relationships, growth, and much more. So I have 5 tips to help you find and connect with other podcasters in your area. I recently did this in celebration of International Podcast Day. I had a meetup with the Greater Cincinnati podcasters in my studio office in Northern Kentucky, and it was a fun time. We had about 6 or 7 podcasters meet up, and there are more than 24 podcasters in the Greater Cincinnati area, and even more if you factor in that EW Scripps, a Cincinnati-based company, owns Midroll, and there are plenty of other podcasters in the area, and even the Cincinnati Inquirer recent podcast, The Accused, launched to truly number 1 in iTunes, not just that fake mythical number 1 spot in the mythical unicorn magic of iTunes New and Noteworthy, but number 1 top podcast overall. That means they got a lot of subscribers in a short amount of time, and that's why they ranked so highly for a little while. Now they're down below the other podcasts as the total lifetime subscriptions take over, but it's really cool to see a Cincinnati-based podcast launched to number 1 in iTunes, and great success. Congratulations to the Cincinnati Inquirer for that great success. Now, if you want to have the opportunity to meet with other podcasters as well, then I highly suggest you follow these 5 tips that I'll share with you. And if you want to follow along in the show notes, comment on this episode, or share this episode with your friends, then go to theaudacitytopodcast.com/local podcasters to get the show notes for episode 284. First, number 1, search Google and iTunes. I know this is probably already obvious, but here's how to approach it. Search Google for things like your city name and the word podcast, or the city name and podcaster. In iTunes or your favorite podcast app, search for the name of your city and look for podcasts that then mention the city by title or in the author tag or in the description. And you could find podcasts either from or about your own city that you may not have realized existed. Once you find these podcasts in this pretty much a surface level search, visit their website or look inside their RSS feeds for an email address or other contact information so that you can connect with these podcasters and then try to build a community among your local podcasters. Number 2 tip, use Twitter Advanced Search. When you use Twitter Search, basic version that is, or advanced, you get 2 really important results, accounts and tweets. Try searching Twitter for things like your city name and podcast, or city name and podcaster. You could even turn those words into hashtags. So instead of simply writing Cincinnati, I might do hashtag Cincinnati. Or instead of writing podcast, I might do hashtag podcast. Remember to also try local abbreviations. For example, Cincinnati's local abbreviation is Cincy, C-I-N-C-Y. Some people even spell it with an I at the end, but it's really supposed to have a Y at the end. Clicking on accounts in the Twitter search results will show you those accounts that belong to people or brands, and they match your search based on the keywords being found in the name, in the location, or in the bio. If you click on live, or under the drop-down, it might be there under tweets, it will show you the latest tweets that match that searched query. Now, these simple keyword-based searches may already return plenty of results of local podcasters you may not have realized exist. You may also see plenty of other results, like, for example, with The Accused recently launching and showing so highly in the rankings, it's very easy to see a lot of tweets that say Cincinnati podcast or podcast by Cincinnati Enquirer, there are a lot of tweets about the podcast in Cincinnati, but they're not from Cincinnati podcasters, and they're not necessarily directly connecting me to other Cincinnati podcasters. So to get more advanced filtering and results, try the Twitter advanced search. So if you go to twitter.com/search, that takes you to the basic search. If you click on the link for advanced search, or the URL for it is twitter.com/search-advanced, and I have these links in the show notes for this episode, then this lets you do a much more specific search. You can do these kinds of advanced searches just simply from the Twitter search bar or a search tool inside of your favorite Twitter app. But using the advanced search page makes it a lot easier to enter this information, and then you can tweak the query from there. For example, you could search by a specific location, whether that be your local town or maybe that's a local major city. Now, when you do that search, you'll see that it adds some terms to your search query. So instead of simply searching for the word podcaster, for example, if I searched for near Cincinnati, then the search query would say podcaster space near quotation mark Cincinnati, space OH quotation mark space within 15 mi. So you can probably figure out what that's doing. It's searching for the word podcaster, where the bio or the tweet location is within 15 miles of Cincinnati. You could replace the name of the city with a zip code, and you can change that within number to maybe it's within 5 miles of that zip code, or maybe within 20 or 30 miles. I've used this method before to find podcasters in middle of nowhere towns, and I was quite amazed to discover podcasters in these cities or towns or small rural areas where I might not have thought anyone even knew what a podcast was, let alone there be a podcaster in that town. I have the links to both the Twitter basic search and the advanced search, as well as an example of a query you could enter in your Twitter app or Twitter search in the show notes for this episode, number 284, at theaudacitytopodcast.com/local podcasters. Number 3, find or make Facebook groups. Facebook can be a fantastic way to find or stay connected with local podcasters. The best thing is to try finding a group that may already exist for podcasters in your area. And when you're searching for your city name, make sure that you search for the nearest well-known city or metropolis names, and not only those small towns. For example, for me, I don't search Northern Kentucky or Florence or Hebron or anything like that. I search for Cincinnati. But I could also try more granular, detailed searches by putting in Florence, Hebron, Burlington, Petersburg, Covington, any of these Northern Kentucky cities. If you can't find a group, consider creating one to start connecting local podcasters with each other. The great thing about a free Facebook group, besides the fact that it's free, is that almost everyone's on Facebook. And it's very easy to get people to be added to the group. And by default, when someone joins a group, notifications are enabled. They can turn those notifications off, and they may have an account-wide setting that they don't receive notifications from groups. But it can be a great way to connect with a small group of local podcasters and support each other instead of joining some really big podcast community that has thousands of people on it, and you're going in there and shouting out into this big abyss, hey, are there any other Cincinnati or any other local podcasters? Well, you could find them and have a private little group for yourselves. The privacy settings you may choose for this are totally up to you, but I recommend that you leave the group open with approval by either yourself and other moderators or approval by anyone else who's already in the group. That's tip number 3. Tip 4, attend or host local events. Local meetups may be your ultimate goal for finding local podcasters, and it can be a lot of fun to have meetups with local podcasters. Like I found when I had several of the greater Cincinnati podcasters meet up in my studio office, and we had pizza and snacks and talked about podcasting and other things, and it was in celebration of International Podcast Day on September 30th. But you don't have to wait for International Podcast Day. You could have these kinds of meetups whenever you want, as frequently as you want. It's possible such meetups and events already happen in your area. So make sure that you search Facebook and event sites like meetup.com to see if there are any meetup groups already in your area. But think beyond podcasting-focused meetup groups. Think also about blogger meetup groups or entrepreneur meetup groups or social media groups or YouTuber groups or WordPress groups or Twitter groups. Any other type of meetup may be appealing to other podcasters, and it could give you the opportunity to meet or even present in that group around the topic of podcasting. Podcasting is connected with social media. Many bloggers want to become podcasters. YouTubers are already creating content that could work as podcast episodes as well. So there's a lot of crossover between these things. Even if you go and don't get to speak about podcasting, you may be able to simply raise your hand and say, hey, I'm new here. Anyone else here host a podcast? I'd love to meet you. Just come over to me, bring a business card. I'd love to connect. It could be really easy. It's not self-promotional. You're putting yourself out there as you want to connect. You simply want to meet other podcasters. If you can't find any such meetup in your area, consider starting one yourself. It could be as simple as having a meal or drinks together, or you could rent or borrow some space, such as a public library or a conference room somewhere, for some kind of training or structured discussions. It can be as rigid or free as you want it to be, but you can't have these opportunities unless you get out there and meet local podcasters or build local podcasters. Maybe you find that blogging community and they are desperately hungry to learn about podcasting, and you can turn some of them into podcasters. That's tip number 4. Tip number 5, support your local podcasters. When you do find other podcasters in your area, help each other out with shout outs in your podcast or compiling a list of local podcasters on your website, or maybe you start a website specifically to list the local podcasters. Maybe you do some kind of cross promotion on Twitter, social networks, or anything like that. Maybe you simply get together to encourage each other because you have a more common bond. Even if their podcast is about something completely different from your own podcast, you have the common bond that you're in the same area. You are probably facing some of the same struggles of growing your podcast, profiting from your podcast, helping your audience profit from your podcast, and more. So try these 5 tips that I gave. Number 1, search Google and iTunes. Number 2, use Twitter Advanced Search. Number 3, find or make Facebook groups. Number 4, attend or host local events. And number 5, support your local podcasters. Try these to find other podcasters in your area. Build that local community because you are changing the world. You are changing lives. It doesn't matter if you're in Los Angeles or New York, or if you're in a tiny little town in the middle of Virginia or somewhere buried in the hills or anything like that. You might be able to find local podcasters. You might have to drive a little bit of a distance, but you could find local podcasters and encourage each other. Now, if you can't find local podcasters, or you want an even better way to receive and give encouragement and challenges and support after you've launched your podcast, then please join Podcasters Society. Check it out at podcasterssociety.com. This is for you if you're anywhere after episode 1, whether you're still somewhat a beginner in the podcasting space, but you've already got your podcast out there, you know how to podcast, but you want to make it even better. You want to get running now that you're on your feet with your podcast, or maybe you've been podcasting for years and you're looking for how you can improve your podcast, how you can grow your audience, how you can start monetizing, how you can start connecting with your audience better. Podcasters Society is for you. Check it out at podcasterssociety.com. And if you try any of these tips that I shared with you, again, they're in the show notes at theaudacitytopodcast.com/local podcasters, then please comment on the show notes to tell me how many local podcasters you found near you. Or you can also tweet me at the Daniel J. Lewis with the hashtag local podcasters. It's the same as the URL for the show notes, theaudacitytopodcast.com/local podcasters. And I have a little tweet in the show notes that you can easily click on to tweet me with that, so that it's easier for you to share with me the podcasters you found, or tell me about the fact that you met local podcasters. And it would be wonderful to see you connecting with other podcasters in your area and perhaps becoming a leader in your local community and in the podcasting space in your area. So get that information and these other links that I mentioned in the show notes for this episode, number 284, at theaudacitytopodcast.com/local podcasters. International Podcast Day 2016 was fantastic. It was mentioned by CNBC, yes, on major national news. They talked about their favorite podcasts in honor of International Podcast Day. Famous people were tweeting about it. It was trending in the top on social networks. And for myself and connecting with other local podcasters, I even got featured on my local news in the Cincinnati Business Courier, and I was on Channel 12 on Sunday morning after International Podcast Day. It was really cool to have those opportunities and to meet other local podcasters and then to celebrate podcasting and the change that podcasts make in other lives and in our own lives. International Podcast Day is every September 30th, so I hope that you'll already start your planning for the next year, no matter how close or how far away it is. And I highly recommend, if you haven't already, get some swag for yourself to support International Podcast Day. Go to internationalpodcastday.com to learn more and get some of that merchandise that you can wear and support International Podcast Day. Two other things I want to tell you about is one, I was on Stephen Spencer's podcast, Marketing Speak, where we talked about SEO for podcasters. Now, Stephen practically wrote the book on SEO, not the original book, but he does have one of those major books that's bigger than the Bible, almost as big as the dictionary, and it's all about search engine optimization. And I was really honored to be on Marketing Speak with Stefan to talk about how SEO relates to podcasters and some of the extra ways that we can use SEO inside of podcasting to be able to grow our podcast, improve our content, and more. Listen to that interview, and I have the link to that in the show notes for this episode, as well as the link to WordCamp Cincinnati. I hope you'll join me for that. If you're a local podcaster or a local blogger, anywhere local to Cincinnati, I'd love to see you at WordCamp Cincinnati, October 15th through the 16th, 2016. I'll be there networking, talking about WordPress, talking about podcasting. And in fact, I'll be presenting a session, How to Podcast with WordPress. I'd love to see you there, either in my session or just there to network, meet other WordPress users, maybe meet other podcasters too. Check that out. I have the link to that, to my interview with Stephen Spencer, and to the local news article that featured me in the Cincinnati Business Courier, all in the show notes at theaudacitytopodcast.com/local podcasters. Remember to find those local podcasters. If nothing else, this week, this is your assignment. This is what I want you to do, the thing I want you to take action on. Find at least one local podcaster. And if at all possible, meet them face to face. Go out for coffee, for lunch, hang out somewhere. Try to meet face to face with another local podcaster and then tell me about it. Comment on the show notes or tweet me from the link in the show notes for this episode at theaudacitytopodcast.com/local podcasters. And I hope that that's the beginning of a mutually profitable relationship for you both and for your podcasts. Now that I've given you some of the guts and taught you some of the tools, it's time for you to go launch or improve your own podcast for sharing your passions and finding success. I'm Daniel J. Lewis from theaudacitytopodcast.com. Thanks for listening. The Audacity to Podcast is a proud member of Noodle Mix Network. Find more of our award-winning and award-nominated podcasts to make you think, laugh, and succeed at noodle.mx. The Audacity to Podcast is also a proud member of the Tech Podcast Network.